Welcome back to Gen Z Bible class, where today we're going to continue to look at the life of Jacob. We looked at Abraham, Jacob's grandfather. We looked at Jacob's father, Isaac, and we're following the story now to this third generation. And the thing that they all have in common, if you'll remember, was this promise that God had made initially to Abraham, that from him he would make a great nation. And so we've kind of followed that storyline down from, father to son to now grandson. And we're going to see some things about Jacob. Well, we've already learned, I guess we could say we've already learned a few things about him as we looked at the story about how he had kind of tricked his brother out of his birthright. And then later on he deceived his father so that he could get the blessing. And this gives us a little sense of, I guess, something about his personality and his nature. In fact, his name, I think, means grabber, that he is, not shy to take what he thinks he deserves. But that sort of comes back to haunt him, and that was where we left him last time, because he deceived his father in order to essentially steal the blessing that should have gone to his older brother, twin brother, Esau. And as a result, Esau vowed to kill him. As soon as Isaac was dead, Esau was going to go after his brother to kill him. So now Jacob is forced to leave. And the real irony there is that all of the stuff that he got by deceiving his father and by, cheating his brother is now lost, because he can't take all that with him. He basically, I don't know, maybe he could take a few silver coins or something, but basically he lost his inheritance that he sort of swindled to get. And so I guess that's poetic justice, or that's God just, teaching somebody a lesson about the right way to do things. But this is kind of where we left Jacob, and he ended up fleeing to his uncle Laban's house, which was pretty far enough away so he didn't have to worry about his brother Esau chasing him. And at the same time, he is gone there to find a wife. He meets Rachel, who is the love of his life. He makes a deal with his uncle that he'll work for 7 years, and then he'll be able to marry Rachel. And the scripture says that the time just flew by because he was so much in love, and isn't that nice? So, we think things are going really well for Jacob at this point. And now he's looking forward to this marriage, and those marriages in that culture were always a real big event, just anticipating this for 7 years. So the big day finally comes, and Laban puts together this feast. And now this is where we're going to pick up and read what's going on, starting in verse 21 of Genesis 29. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, my time is complete, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. Well, this is where things get a little interesting, isn't it? Because a few questions come to my mind. Number one, and maybe the first thing you think about, how is it that he didn't know he was making love to Leah instead of Rachel? And my only explanation for that is, you notice it says that Laban gave a big feast, and this was part of the custom of the day. I mean, this was a time to celebrate. This was one of the biggest celebrations of anyone's life, was a marriage. And it went on for 7 days. I'm thinking that maybe that first night Jacob might have had a little too much wine. I don't know. I'm just guessing. And maybe Leah wore a veil. I mean, who knows? I don't know what the customs of today were. Maybe it was just really dark out. But the bottom line is, he is now deceived. And I think there is probably some poetic justice in all this as well, because just as he deceived his father, so he was deceived in, very similar kind of a way. And he gets all upset and he asks Laban, what is this? And, he wakes up the next morning, maybe has a cup of coffee, and he looks and, you're not Rachel. And he goes to Laban, his uncle, and asks him, what is this all about? Well, I think actually, again, this gets back to understanding the culture of the day, the customs and the culture of the day. There is actually kind of a logical reason why Laban might have done this. And the thing we have to keep in mind was that, well, first of all, the custom was that the oldest would get married first and then on down the line. But for a woman to not be married in that culture was a very serious thing, because she depended, they didn't have social security checks coming in the mail like we do, and they didn't have extended families that could take care of them or government agencies that would take care of them. They were pretty much on their own. And if a woman in that time found herself with no children, it really could have been a matter of life and death. And in a way, Laban is expressing concern for his oldest daughter, and chances are, if he didn't pull this off, nobody would have ever married Leah. And I don't know if, the scripture mentions that she was weak in her eyes. Maybe she had some disability. She didn't seem like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and it was a very good chance that maybe nobody would have married her. So Laban is trying to accomplish two things. For the benefit of his oldest daughter, Leah, he's assigning her a husband. And, so it sort of makes sense from that standpoint. And the thing, again, we have to understand is when a man in that time slept with a woman, it was like making a legal contract. From that time on, you were responsible to take care of her and, to meet all of her needs. So Laban actually makes out pretty good in this deal, because he loses the responsibility to take care of Leah for the rest of his life. He gets rid of actually two responsibilities, because he also gets rid of Rachel. I shouldn't say it that way, but he's happy to give Rachel as well as part of the deal. And fortunately, he held Jacob responsible to be faithful to Leah for just that 1 week, the marriage week. So to be fair to Leah, she gets Jacob for 1 week. She gets his presence, but she doesn't get his love. And we're going to see that this is the dynamics that's going to come about in this family. That it makes it very clear that Jacob loved Rachel, but not so much with Leah. And so this is kind of, where we're at. And again, it's like kind of a poetic justice that he gets deceived in this way. So he finishes this week of marriage, this marriage week with his new unexpected wife, Leah. And then after that, and after those 7 days were over, then he is also married to Rachel, and he completes the marriage week with her. So now he's got a family that he wasn't planning on. He has 2 wives, and also he has, as part of his household, the maidservants of the wives. And now Leah had a maidservant, and her name was Zilpah, and Rachel also had a maidservant. Her name was Bilhah. They come into the whole story here that we're going to start about the children of Jacob. And this is kind of it's kind of an interesting story here as we see now how his family grows. And one of the things that's different here now is that when, God made a promise to Abraham, and that was specifically to Abraham. And then that promise was handed down to Isaac, specifically to him. Ishmael he didn't get in on that at all. And all the other children that Abraham had, he actually sent them away so they wouldn't interfere with this, with with Isaac and passing this promise down to him. And then we talked last time about how Jacob also kind of woke up to the fact that this promise was also to be received by him. But here's where things get different. We're going to find that Jacob is going to have 12 sons. And we'll just kind of quickly outline that. Now, the way he does that requires, it's almost like you need to make a spreadsheet to keep track of where all these 12 sons come from. But overall, the thing to keep in mind is that now this promise is not going to be handed down to just one of those sons. From this point on, this promise is going to be, I guess in a way you could say, put upon this whole family, all 12 of these brothers. So we want to get kind of an overview of what God is doing, with a long-term sort of sight in mind. So it helps us understand some of the details about what we're reading about here. But real quickly, we want to go over where do all these 12 sons come from? And we begin that story when we look at Genesis 29:31 and the verses following. It says that the Lord saw that Leah was not loved. He enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And we're going to find out not just one son, but 4 sons, like right off the bat. So God saw, this is something that we learn about God, is he's concerned about all the details of our life. And while Leah didn't receive love, or the kind of love she wanted from Jacob, she did receive it from God. And I think in a way, this verse is telling us that God sort of felt sorry for her. And he compensated the fact that she wasn't exactly loved by Jacob. He compensated her by giving her children. So right off the bat, she has 4 children. The first one was named Reuben. Each one of them had a meaning to their name. The name Reuben means see, a son. It's like saying, oh boy, this is the first one of Jacob's sons. The second one was named Simeon, and that is to hear. His name means to hear, which is God heard her prayer for a son. The third one was named Levi, and he's going to become important because he's actually going to serve a very special place in the family of Israel, in the nation of Israel. And then finally, she has Judah, who also will play a big role in the history of Israel. So now she has these 4 sons. And what happens next? Well, let's read, go to chapter 30 now in the first couple of verses. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." And Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" Now, Rachel was rightly frustrated, and you can almost imagine, keeping in mind the fact that this was a big deal for women at that time to have children. It was how you defined your life. And Rachel is sitting there and counting, all these children that her older sister Leah is having. 1, 2, 3, 4, how long is this going to go on? And I'm still, not having any children. And there is a lesson here. I think something that we can learn about marriage, that this had an effect on her relationship with Jacob, as we've just read. She kind of blamed him for this. And I've seen this happen in marriages before, where a couple will be happy and they'll be in love, and then they meet some obstacle, some difficulty. I've seen people that specifically have had a child with disabilities, and that's literally wrecked their marriage. It sort of destroyed their marriage, because what happens is you get into this blaming the other person, or if I hadn't married you, none of this would have happened. And so that's it's a very understandable feeling that Rachel had, but I think we can see how it put this, well, I don't know, kind of a damp towel on the fire of their love between Jacob and Rachel. Well, anyway, what happens next? Well, Rachel comes up, she has a solution to her problem. And it was very much like the solution that Abraham and Sarah had when they couldn't have kids and they thought God had forgotten all about them. And Sarah says, well, Mary, you can take my servant Hagar and have children through her. And they thought they were solving their problem that way. Of course, it made bigger problems. But Rachel has a similar idea. She says, take my servant Bilhah. And that's exactly what Jacob does. And now Bilhah has two sons, and number 5 and number 6. The one named Dan, his name means judge, and one named Naphtali, which means my struggle. And again, they're kind of, have meaning in those situations. Well, so now we're up to what? We're up to 6 kids through 2 different women. But we're not done yet. We still need 6 more kids, and here's where they come from. Leah, who is, Rachel's older sister, who already had 4 kids, is noticing that she's not having any more kids now. And she sees what Rachel did with her maidservant, Bilhah, and she says, I'm going to take my maidservant, whose name was Zilpah, and give her to Jacob to sleep with, and then she will bear children. It's almost like there's this baby competition going on between these 2 factions, these 2 sisters. And, this is, I guess you could call sibling rivalry when it comes down to how many kids they're going to have. Well, anyway, Zilpah ends up having 2 more kids. So now we're up to number 8. Gad, whose name means good fortune, and Asher, whose name means happy or blessed. So we've got now 8 kids through 3 mothers. Now we get into this other little story, and this is kind of a detailed story that I'm not sure, why these details are in the scripture, but it kind of helps us to understand the next event that happens and how some more children come along. And what happens is that Reuben, who he was the first of Leah's children, the first of Jacob's children, he's out in the fields and he finds some mandrakes. What are mandrakes? Well, they believed at that time, and maybe there was good reason to believe, that a mandrake could help in the issue of fertility. It was some kind of plant. They couldn't go to Kinney Drugs and just, buy medicine. They had to find the medicine out in the fields and through plants and herbs and things like that. So these mandrakes were highly prized. And it would have been even more prized by Rachel because, she had this issue of fertility. She couldn't have children. So she gets wind of the fact that Reuben, who is Leah's older son, has found these mandrakes. And they make a deal. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? Very well, Rachel said. He can sleep with you, meaning Jacob, tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. So now we got this little deal going on here between Rachel and Leah. And Rachel wants to get her hands on those mandrakes. And she has to make a deal. Okay, you can sleep with Jacob. And, in exchange for these mandrakes. Well, what happens? It didn't work out the way Rachel was planning. Leah ends up having 2 more children. Issachar, whose name means reward, and Zebulun, whose name means to honor or to dwell. So now we're up to 10 children. And poor Rachel has still not had any children. Well, I'm happy to say that the next thing we read about is how God grants children to Rachel. And we read about that in starting at verse 22. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. So finally, these being the last, I guess you could say the last couple of sons of Jacob, has a son. She names him Joseph. And Joseph is going to play a very key role in the rest of the book of Genesis, a big part of what happens in the storyline in the book of Genesis. And she finally has one more son named Benjamin, and he ends up being, the caboose of the family, the youngest son. And probably, I imagine there must have been quite an age difference between Reuben and Benjamin. I think we'll see that later in what happens in some of the stories. So this is how Jacob ends up with 12 sons. But what is the meaning of all of this? And what is the significance of these 12 sons? Well, the real significance is, as we said, this promise was not passed down to any one of these sons, but it was, I guess you could say, evenly distributed among them. So they become the foundation upon which the whole nation of Israel is built. And the 12 tribes of Israel maintain their identity. And this is almost, I guess, miraculous when you think about it from a historical perspective. We have to kind of zoom back a little bit and see the next 400 years of what's going to be happening with these the descendants of these 12 sons. And we remember, you can go back to the time when God was speaking to Abraham, and he said, your descendants are going to spend 400 years in Egypt. And that's exactly what's going to happen. By the time Jacob gets old, and there's a whole story of Joseph and how they end up in Egypt. Well, we haven't got to that yet, but we will. And for 400 years, these descendants of Jacob and the descendants of these 12 sons live in Egypt, and they grow into a mighty nation. In a way, God uses Egypt as kind of a garden to plant this nation, and they go from just a handful of people, these 12 children of Jacob and whatever kids they might have had in Egypt, this handful of people, and they grow to 1 or 2 million people after that 400 years in Egypt. And the amazing thing is, this is the really interesting thing, even after they leave Egypt and they go into the promised land after all of those centuries, they still retain their identity as tribes. And when they enter the promised land, that land is divided up into 12 different areas, in one for each of those 12 tribes. So if you study history and you see how people groups develop and go, these 12 tribes should have dissolved, after maybe 3 or 4 generations. But that's not what happened. They maintained their identity as tribes, as these 12 different tribes. And I think in a way that was miraculous. And then we're going to find out that there's something significant about this number 12. Why did God work with these 12? Well, I think there might have been some practical reasons in terms of building a nation, and maybe why, even though we don't recommend having more than one wife, it could have had something to do with the gene pool. That from these 4 different women, now you're adding a more complex gene pool, and God knows what he's doing when it comes to all that stuff. We're still not recommending more than one wife per person, because it just never works out. But the number 12, it becomes significant because it sort of gets repeated in the New Testament. How many disciples did Jesus choose? He chose 12. And it also, this is another amazing thing. When we read in the book of Revelation about what the New Jerusalem, heaven, looks like, it's described as being like a big square, and it has 3 gates on each side. So there's 12 gates, And each of those gates is named after one of the tribes of Israel. So there's just all kinds of fascinating things that are going on here when we think about how this family of 12 people actually become the foundation for a whole nation. What are we going to conclude from all of this? Well, I think that there are some real lessons we can learn, first of all, about marriage. One is that marriage is based on love, yes, like Jacob loved Rachel, but it's also involves commitment. And Jacob and Rachel did run into some difficulties, some difficult times when, she's yelling at him for not being able to have children, and he says, it's not my fault, don't blame me. But they stuck together. And I think that's because Jacob had committed himself. It wasn't just that he loved her, but he committed himself to her. And I think that's an important thing to learn about love and commitment. Now, I know we have this custom in our culture today that you go out and you fall in love with someone, and we have our well, if you get married, I know that's something that a lot of people are sort of forgetting about these days, but I highly recommend marriage because it means you've made this commitment to someone, and you're not just going to run off when things get bad, because every marriage is going to have difficulties, and every marriage requires commitment. And one man and one woman is really the only way that this is going to work, which is why we have laws against people marrying more than one woman. It makes a lot of sense. Some countries, they have what they call arranged marriages, and I guess in a way this was slightly arranged. It was Isaac and Rebekah that told Jacob to go down and to find a wife, from this family group. And the interesting thing is, I've noticed, I know I have friends from other cultures and countries, and sometimes their marriages are arranged. And they really stick together just as well as, going out and picking somebody yourself. So I think that just reminds us of how important it is in a marriage relationship. Yes, there has to be love, but there also has to be that commitment, that it's like a holy bond, like it's an illegal agreement that you make. And when you stick to it, then you will be blessed. Then when you get to your old age, and you get to be as old as I am, you're still married, you have wonderful memories to think back on, and you also have children and grandchildren to enjoy as well. The other thing, and I think the final thing, is we see God's sovereignty in all of this. That God made this promise to Abraham, and he is going to make sure that it all comes true. God is going to keep his end of the bargain, in spite of the fact that he's working with these people who have these sinful human natures, and they do things that, aren't always right or good. But this is basically who God is. When he makes a promise, he keeps it. And he's going to use these 12 imperfect, and we're going to see in the future how imperfect they actually are, even dysfunctional to a certain point, this family, how he's going to use this family as the foundation to build this nation, this special chosen people. So what we want to do, again, as we said, we want to read these stories. We want to know about what happened, but we also want to learn things about ourselves, learn things about God, and really things about the history of the world, because these things that started back then are still kind of rolling around in this world today. We see the effects of some of these things and some of these relationships, these family relationships that happened way back then, that are still showing themselves today in world history and current events. So, well, anyway, I hope this has been a blessing to you. And the story, these stories get more and more fascinating as we go on. So I hope you will be able to join us next time on Gen Z Bible Class.